So hello everyone and welcome back to the viaGood podcast, a podcast designed to inspire you, our listeners from across the globe, to change our world via doing good. Now, every month, our guests share ways that we can take action against the world's greatest challenges and achieve the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And you can learn all about the goals in the show notes. Now, this week's episode is with Arthur F. Sniegon, founder and coordinator of the Czech-based NGO Save Elephants. Now, Arthur dedicates his life to protecting elephants and other wildlife through biodiversity monitoring and anti-poaching efforts. Operating in the Central African region, specifically in Congo, Brazzaville, Chad and Cameroon over the past 12 years. Now, Arthur, alongside his team and local partners, help to keep elephants safe. Save Elephants exists to ensure that these magnificent creatures, like elephants, remain healthy and thrive. Now, it is estimated that as of this year, 2022, there are about 450,000 elephants left in the world. And 40 years ago, there were about 1.3 million. And sadly, between the years 1979 and 1989, over 50% of the elephant population was totally wiped out. And this massacre led to an international ban on ivory in 1989. But as we'll find out, the threat against elephants is still very much real and here today. Arthur and his team hope to put an end to the systematic attack against elephants through their conservation work in partnership with local communities. And you can find more about this wonderful NGO in their latest film, The Elephangelist, which is available on YouTube, and the links are available in the show notes. So after that intro, hello Arthur, welcome.
Hello, I'm happy to be here with you.
Delighted to have you here. And I guess the first question is an obvious one, and that's, where did it all begin? What sort of drove your passion for protecting elephants and other wildlife?
Honestly, it's so difficult for me to track back the original passion and the trigger moment. I guess it was when I was a little child, when I started to discover all the wildlife creatures around me. And I have to announce from the beginning that I was not born in Central Africa or in like a super wild place in Europe. It was a normal outskirts of a bigger town, a mid-sized town in the eastern part of the Czech Republic, and therefore, all the animals around me were little, songbirds and amphibians, insects, and so on. But this somehow released the passion for animals and for nature for me, in me. And I followed this path because my parents were open to that choice, which I personally made. And a few years after, during my university studies, I happened to be in the middle of nowhere in Central Africa, and this completely opened a new window for me. And I started to realize that I can become an active player in conservation and other activities linked to the tropic regions, which always attracted me since the beginning. But I wouldn't guess that I would start so early and so I would say so actively as an activist, as somebody who can really do things on his own and contribute to the big problem, which the more I understand, the more I'm afraid of.
I can imagine. I think most of our listeners can probably resonate with that, at least for myself with the climate crisis as well. I totally understand when you are passionate about something and your intrigue and sort of craving for knowledge grows, but it also brings with it lots more problems, I guess, which we will get to. So specifically, I think poaching is a big issue, particularly with elephants, and it's something that your film highlights really, really well. And I will ask you later sort of what other drivers are creating this decline in elephant populations. But poaching specifically, which is the illegal killing and trafficking of wildlife, for our listeners in case they weren't sure, is one of the biggest threats. So despite this, why do you think that the problem is so widespread? Elephants are amazing. I think most people have a sort of deep connection to specifically elephants. But yet they're still being hunted and tracked down. So what do you think is the driving force behind that?
First, maybe not first of all, but one of the main reasons is nobody is watching them. Africa is a huge continent. It is much bigger than we see it on the regular map. Take a globe and then you can see the real size of Africa.
Of course.
And especially countries such as DRC, DR Congo, South Sudan, Central African Republic, those countries with poor governance, very often like thick vegetation or impenetrable or difficult terrain to operate in, are countries with previously very high numbers of wildlife in general, not only elephants. In the past, rhinos, big herds of ungulates and others, and carnivores, of course. And everybody, until recently, believed or presumed that there are still big numbers of animals and elephants left. But it happened to be clear that those vast regions of the country, which is very naturally looking, there is very few other negative human impact. The population of those countries is pretty low. In the rural areas, there is basically no infrastructure, no factories, no cities, no railways, nothing you would suspect in other places of the world. So there is still a big, a lot of space, and therefore it's so shocking that it's really just because of the targeted killing of elephants for ivory, not for other reasons, which drives them closer and closer to the threat of extinction. And it really happens locally. Right. You mentioned the number of elephants in the wild, which is true, but combined to both species. Since recently, the IUCN, the biggest conservation union, acknowledged and confirmed that there are actually two species of African elephants: the so-called bush elephant or savanna elephant, and the forest elephant, which is more elusive, and critically endangered. Only several dozens of thousand individuals left in the wild. So, and specifically in the case of the forest elephants, they've lost more than 62 or 63% of their numbers between 2002 and 2011, and they've lost 30% of the range within this short period of 1 decade. Gosh. And the trend is still going on, maybe a bit slower, but still unsustainably fast.
And with the ban on ivory, I'm glad you mentioned it, because I think ivory is a main factor in poaching and a main incentive. But if it's an international law, that you can't poach, what is preventing that from being implemented? Is it a matter of not being able to monitor their activities, or why is it still possible?
Yeah, the poaching of this kind usually happens in the areas and zone and countries with poor governance. It may be the so-called failed state with no real power of the governmental institutions or some international organizations. So that's the first incentive or facilitator, actually. And one of the incentives is also the poverty in those countries, because it's pretty easy to kill an elephant, and really easy to sell the ivory further for some significantly high amount of money, which the local people wouldn't gain from other sources, from other legal sources. So the ivory remains something very reachable in those areas where elephants still appear. The same was the case of rhinos. Nowadays, because of their much lower total numbers, they are much more protected. So it becomes a task which is dangerous and difficult to hunt a rhino. Whereas in case of elephants, if you are a rural hunter in South Sudan or Congo or Cameroon, where elephants are roaming around, it's pretty easy to get them. And also in case of your interrogation, in case of you are caught red-handed, let's say, the threats for the poacher or for the traffickant to be jailed and that the law will be really enforced is pretty low, because in many of these countries the wildlife laws are existent but not really reinforced, and and the justice sector of those countries, the segment of trials and procurators and jurists are not really ready for that, and not taking it serious as it should be.
Right. And why do you think this lack of action? Of course, you mentioned poor governance is one of them, but would you also say that, I don't know, are elephants, particularly in these regions, seen as something that should be protected, or something that, it's a natural way of life? There are hunters, for example. Is that an argument that you're hearing at all?
In case of elephants, nowadays, people usually understand that these are really in danger or protected animals at least. It's a charismatic, emblematic species. So even in the poor society, somehow people are affected by the elephants. On the other hand, they see it as a resource because it has been so for ages, for generations.
Right.
Nobody today would publicly say that, no, we have to kill the elephants and that's the best way. Mm-hmm. And the law of these countries, now talking especially about the Central African countries, recognize that the elephants should be present, and the numbers should actually grow back to the previous scales. But as I said, what is written is one side. We have to see at the B side, which is what is reinforced. Definitely. That's why we started with our NGO to get in and protect struggling or successful local institutions or individuals in their fight, to bring about some results which may be local, but which may maybe inspire some other people, other organizations in the region.
I love that. And I'll ask more about how Save Elephants operate. But for now, I just wanted to sort of ask on the poaching theme a question about livelihoods, because, of course, I think a lot of poachers, you mentioned, see ivory as a sort of financial resource, I'm sure. So obviously we want to enhance biodiversity and we want to end poaching, but how do we do that in a way that doesn't restrict the livelihoods of people who need or think that they need ivory for an income? Mm-hmm. So what do we do about these communities? Because presumably they would need to replace that income with something else. So do you have any suggestions for what that might be?
Yeah, first maybe, and I would make a difference between the targeted elephant ivory poaching and then the other poaching activities, which concerns other animals for bushmeat or for other products. The elephant hunting is pretty narrow-angled. It's not big proportion of the local population which is involved. It's a matter of few individuals in the community, and very often those individuals are not even part of the local community. Those are people, immigrants from elsewhere, from a neighboring country or from the poorer regions. So hunting elephants for ivory doesn't really match the general good of the community. Very, very few people are involved. I mean, in relatively to the size of the human population there. Mm-hmm, so this is purely a criminal activity, and you have to fight the criminal activity with power, with force. Of course, that's one of the angle which should be reinforced. So repression. I mean, rangers, patrolling, of course, investigations and some intel in those communities. That's one side. Then we can talk later about the activities which can prevent, the incentives to poach. But by the elephants, usually the normal population understands that it's something which is restricted to a few individuals and doesn't give any other benefit to the rest of the community. While what I said for the rest of the taxa, all mammals actually from the size of a small frog or a mouse or rat, through ungulates and carnivores, primates, all the way to buffaloes or gorillas, for instance, are targeted for their meat, the so-called bushmeat, and this is a very deeply rooted tradition which has been there since ever. It has been so in all the continents, but in Africa, because of the relative species richness or the biomass richness of the remaining animals, it's still something very actual and current situation, that people are depending on the protein income from the wild, and this already concerns everybody. So people ask me regularly, like, how many poachers are there in the village? I said, like, every man, every boy who can already walk is a poacher, and he can hunt, and they do it well. They can hunt everything which is around their village, or they have to penetrate farther in case they have already exterminated those species around. So that's maybe a bigger issue, because the hunting for bushmeat is not really considered as something evil, because it concerns pretty much everyone.
And I think that links back to my question about whether or not people see it as something natural, particularly for food, for subsistence. I can imagine the arguments being fairly strong that, we need this meat for our family to survive, for example. So in the regions that you're working in, what other means is there? I'm sure there is definitely a plethora of other ways that they can subsist themselves. And what are they, and what's the sort of barriers preventing that from happening? I think you mentioned about the biomass. Obviously, an elephant can feed a lot of people, I'd imagine. But are there any other barriers to accessing other more sustainable ways of eating?
Definitely there are, because the poaching is happening because of the ease of doing so. This is the easiest way to get a meat, and it's pretty obvious. You just need a gun, or you need metallic snares, for instance, and you will get some meat sooner or later. You don't have to, intellectually think about it, and you don't have to have a big budget for it. Whereas the other systems, like subsistence agriculture or meat production of domestic animals, or even some regulatory hunting, which would require selecting those species which are protected, or which are definitely not to be hunted, and then the others which reproduce faster. You may discern, and it would be actually a good way of hunting in some of the regions. But this already requires more, planning and coordination, and it is more difficult than the usual way of hunting. So, what I believe must be done in these regions is really encouraging people to switch to another system and help them, because, like, the poor hunter, which is sometimes, very often, as I said, it's basically every man, or many of the men. They also provide their family with their own, grown agriculture products. So they have a small field of bananas or cassava or maize or whatever, and alongside with that, they go hunting or they go fishing if there is a river. But they would not switch to like a small scale animal production, because I'm trying it now on my own in Congo.
Wow.
And it's pretty difficult to get like even a normal animal, because in these regions, it is not very common to breed animals or rear animals for meat consumption. So there are barriers, financial barriers, the know-how barriers, because to be honest, these regions are not the easiest to breed animals. That's why they are not really there. So you have to select the good breed, you have to watch the veterinarian aspect, etc., the logistics, just to get an animal to the middle of the Congolese forest requires some logistics means which don't exist for the local people. And of course, at the other side, you have to be careful, because you don't want to bring motivation to clear land to make pastures, as we may see it in the Amazon, for instance. Definitely. So it has to be very well and wisely planned for the particular locality. Use those areas which are already inhabited by people or degraded, and produce some domestic protein from animals, or from like fisheries. Breeding fish when possible and where possible.
That's so interesting, and I think there are so many different avenues that I want to tackle that problem from. But a main question I have is, particularly with Save Elephants, knowing that this ability for the community to be able to subsist themselves and to be able to stay alive and thrive, there are all of these barriers. So what work are Save Elephants, or you specifically, doing to sort of make that an easier reality? Because as you mentioned, it's not a simple, you don't just go and buy some seeds and have them grow. So yeah, what sort of work are you doing in that space? I'd be really fascinated to hear more.
So first of all, in those regions where the big megafauna, big herbivores such as elephants or hippos exist and coexist with people, we try to mitigate the conflict which goes on.
Okay.
The crop raiding. Those mega herbivores are really responsible for serious losses on the crops, and this is a threat for the local communities. So they can't even develop something more sufficient for them, because a big part of the production is being destroyed by the elephants. Right. Because again, for the elephants, it's the easiest way to get the food. It doesn't mean that there is no food in the forest or savannas around, but if the field is available, why not? So we don't prevent elephants from eating, or we don't move them to starve, but we protect selected parts of the fields. And we are aware, and we explain to the local people that there is no way of protecting all the fields, but we select those which are fertile or which are important for the local people, and we use different methods to mitigate this crop raiding problem.
Wow.
We've started 7 years ago in 2015 in southern Chad with savanna elephants using beehive barriers along the fields.
I love this project.
That's a really, it's not a biological weapon, but it's a biological barrier.
Yeah.
Because elephants tend to avoid bees for a good reason. They are aggressive, they sting you like over all the body, including your sensitive parts, of course. Nothing to be compared to a European bee, which we know from the Czech Republic, for instance. So that's that's the first step, to ensure that people will not really starve or be deprived from the basic needs. And then we can introduce some other ideas, like there are some species of local animals in those countries, wild animals which may be used for breeding. In Congolese or in the Congo Basin, it might be several species of the rodents, like big rats, but they are not like rats you imagine in the ditches here in the city, but like nice wild animal with very high quality meat. Very often those rodents are actually preferred on the bushmeat market because it simply tastes delicious. So now we are starting a project in Congo also to start this breeding of the cane rats, or giant poached rats and other species. Of course, there are indigenous species of antelopes which you might require more space, but it can be in some semi-wild spaces. They would be more resistant or resilient to the local diseases, unlike cattle, and are less destructive to the environment than some other species which are introduced from abroad. So yes, so now we try to securize the fields in different parts of Chad, and now we start in Congo also in the relation with forest elephants. We do it in Chad with hippos, which actually have lower population numbers than elephants, but not declining so fast. So the trend is, declining, but not so steep as in case of the elephants. Yeah, and then in the second row, I'm really happy to open the window for different projects, students, researchers who want to experiment. We have a good base of local knowledge. We can introduce them to the communities or to the, sometimes very difficult administrative environment. And if there are individuals or groups or students who want to try some, development of this kind, I would be really happy to grow our numbers and allowing them to do that.
Amazing. Well, I will definitely drop any links for our listeners to be able to contact you to do that. I think my next question is about motivation, because I think we've spoken a lot about the problem, and I'm sure when our listeners watch the movie, they will see the sort of harsh realities of what is actually happening to these amazing creatures. So keeping that in mind, and also all of the barriers we sort of spoke about already, how do you stay motivated? Maybe the devastation and the destruction is in itself motivating, but how do you remain, how do you keep pushing when there are so many potential hurdles still to come, despite the fantastic work that you've done?
Yeah, it's true that it doesn't always issue in a positive outcome. Sometimes we fail. Some projects didn't really work well, or we are still in like a sleeping phase of the project. We are looking for other support to make it happen. So sometimes, yes, I have to be. I have to admit that the work is not easy, but I really don't see any other option than going on different levels. What helps me is. What definitely does help is when I can see the wild animals like in the natural habitat, times to time. It's not my usual work, being behind the natural herds of elephants or see the primates which are not afraid of people. This is like a reward for me, and every such a reward is very very motivating. And if I can bring some other people, my colleagues, my coworkers, volunteers, and if they can also witness this beauty, it multiplies our like a common energy, and we are really grateful and humble to see those animals in the wild or in the good conditions, and this gives me the energy, and definitely the backing from my family, my partner, my friends is also one of the factors which facilitates my endurance, or my my ever-going activity there.
So yes, you said the word endurance, which I think is a perfect word to describe, particularly for myself. I'm very passionate about taking action against the climate crisis, and I find it is about being endurant, or having endurance, or sort of stamina to take action. But I wanted to know specifically which activities Save Elephants do, not only against poaching, but also just to maintain biodiversity within the Central African region. Because I know from reading on your website so many different angles that you're tackling. You mentioned nature-based solutions, such as the sort of beehives. But yeah, I'd love to have a sort of bigger picture of exactly what activities are happening at the moment and what people can get involved in.
So these days, those conflict mitigating activities in case of elephants or hippos is one of the core of our activities, and we would like to expand because it proves to be successful, and we need to show it to more people in the region to adhere to these approaches. On the other side, we also focus on the repression side, on the reinforcement. We are not directly responsible, and we don't have the mandate to arrest people or seize stuff. So in those cases, we always work with local institutions or local structures. For many years, I've been active in Congo as a colleague or as an employee, also in the African Parks Network or in the Eagle Network. So those international structures which focus on very tough regions or tough problematics, and with our resources which we have from Save Elephants, like other people, other materials, other finances, we help those organizations to get more results. Like from the beginning of the sniffer dog project in Congo, which was in 2014. We gathered support from the Czech Republic in the form of trainers, donated dogs, already trained dogs, materials, finances. So we helped this project to grow and to be stabilized in Congo. And after many years of this mutual collaboration, I'm happy to say that the project actually split in two, and they are both in good hands. Jane Goodall Institute took over one, and African Parks took over the second one. And I can only observe it from distance and sometimes give an advice also. So after many years of endurance and sometimes hard moments, we can say that it survived and it grows. It grows actually in terms of activity or range of activities and people and dogs involved. So I'm happy for that. In the field of repression, we also support in some regions the anti-poaching patrols. We help them to get good gear, equipment, or financially support their work. And importantly, I'm still personally involved in some undercover intel and investigations. I wish that there are more people who can be involved, because everyone has only one face and one voice, and I cannot repeat it again and again, because penetrating to the criminal networks or syndicates might be risky. Maybe not as risky as people normally imagine, but the risk is that you just fail and you spoil the work of the bigger team. So I wish to have more people who can collect information, interpret it, be in touch with the traffickers, very often ivory traffickers, but also other products. Like our last operation, which happened in collaboration with the Laga, which is part of the Eagle network in Cameroon, involved an ape skull trafficker. This is a phenomenon for Central and West Africa, using ape skulls, sometimes heads, which are just smoked or dried, for different ritual, voodoo kind, traditional medicine kind of activities. So those countries are really, the Central African, West African countries are really big hubs for such animal trafficking. And any kind of information, even from a regular tourist, when you go to those countries, please visit one of the markets, and you can contact our or other organizations, because every single information can be important. When drinking beer in the pub, you can ask around about some wildlife products, or you can ask for pets, and every such tip can help to discover more. And this of course doesn't count only for Central Africa, but very often to regions where people go more often, like Southeast Asia. The pet trade is a big challenge there. Other places of the world as well. So when people travel, they can also think about how can they partially help in discovering those things.
I think that's such a good suggestion, and something that I have never thought about as a tourist or someone not in an official organization, that you can actually help by.
Because your information can really help. It doesn't really represent any threat to you, because you just ask, you take a picture, or you get a contact of the person, and then you disappear forever.
Wow.
You don't have to be involved in the further phases, but the information might be very, very valuable.
I think we definitely need to write a blog post or something to show people exactly how to do that and who to contact. But a question I had just about, as you say, I think particularly in certain cultures, you mentioned voodoo, for example, or medicine. How do we break down what is the line between, I guess, imposing the way that we think that things should be, for example, in the north? I think most people listening to this podcast would agree that poaching and the decline of any animal species is a negative thing. But in places where it's seen as part of the culture or as part of their identity in some ways, how do we sort of break down that tension? Because it's really difficult to not go into a country and say, this is how it should be. But also we can't turn a blind eye and say, oh, it's just a cultural matter. So do you have any sort of idea of navigating that?
Wow. If I knew, this is a
big question.
A difficult one. I think that the interventions from one culture to another is a natural thing, and nobody should be afraid of expressing their opinion, because the cultural exchange in a good way or in a bad way, like it's a phenomenon going on for millennia, and one culture affected the other, and this is the evolution, that's the driver for changes. So I don't have to be, scared to go to Africa and try to do something, because I know that the world is changing. So let's take it this way. And of course, there are big differences, and we don't know the answers for all of your questions. But what I believe, those changes in mentalities should start by children, and because with children you can put them another angle of view for things which are traditional or which are automatic for them, such as eating an ape, which equals to be normal. If you come and say, no, it's not so normal, because it used to be normal for the generation of your grandparents, because there were plenty of apes and few people today, and you will show them the numbers, it's not possible anymore. And it will not change the whole society, but gradually it will become at least a theme for thinking for these people. So until now, we've not been so active in these educational or awareness campaigns, but we start now. There is a program called Education for Conservation, and our well-known Czech primatologist Stanislav Lhota is now introducing us to this project, so that we can start with really like preschool children and follow their years all the way to the adulthood, and we can probably teach them things and show them how they can think about the environment around. Then the religious / medicine aspect or traditional beliefs is very deep rooted, and I don't know how long will it take. I think that even in European Czech context, we have some of those beliefs which we believe, but which are totally nonsense, because science say that, or we see that there are no results. In Africa, with less education in the average community, we can't really expect those changes to happen very fast. So in those cases, such as trafficking ape skulls, we have to be strict, and we just have to arrest the guy and say this is bad, and then let's talk about why is it bad. But we have to be strict and fast, because otherwise there'll be no more apes and no more traditional medicine.
Goodness, but yes, good point. And you've mentioned quite a bit about different partners and different sort of groups that you're working with. I'd love to hear more about, I guess, locally led solutions, if there are any. You mentioned the Jane Goodall Institute, for example, but are there any sort of organizations on the ground already that are either working with Save Elephants or are working independently to try and, I guess, from within the community, make these changes? Are you seeing that sort of shift happen there?
There are some, and we collaborate with some of them. For instance, in southern Chad, along the Cameroon and Central African border, so a very tricky area to work in, there is a group of great people led by local leaders, not leaders in terms of chiefs of the villages or politicians, but people who want to make a good change. They've been originally focused more on fighting the poverty, but they recognized, even before our partnership or intervention, they recognized that the wildlife protection and environmental issues are very closely linked to those problems. So for instance, they tried to protect the fields against elephants using chili pepper fences, which also works, probably not so effectively in this region, such as bees. So we just adapt it and work with them. They also focus on of education of people, and they're also very active in the human rights issues regarding the position of women in these areas. And in general, all kind of human rights threats, which is like a daily, unfortunately, a daily issue in this region, which is might be sometimes full of violence, kidnapping of people, banditism, of course, a huge corruption in the in the ruling system in the country, some trans-border clashes, a very difficult area to work with, and these people sustain, and we excuse me,
no problem. Yeah, difficult indeed.
So these people remain there, so we want to support them as much as we can, doing their activity and keeping them as safe as possible in these unsafe zones.
Goodness, there's so much to unpick, and I think we could be here forever. I think, particularly with the sort of amount of barriers and how to systematically tackle them. But I know that two areas that Save Elephants really focus on are technology and nature-based solutions, as we've just mentioned. And I'd love to hear more about that intersection. Sort of how do you use both technology and nature to help part of the problem?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I didn't mention that a big part of our activities these days are different types of monitoring of the wildlife, respectively the poaching as well. And we use conventional and less conventional devices, very often different camera traps, which we use for like a designed monitoring of the big species in the Congolese forest, let's say, which is impenetrable, very difficult to observe. Otherwise, you are not able to estimate the number of elephants or other, unless you can either see them on the camera trap or you can go around and count dung piles, and then you estimate and the camera traps, of course, give you more ideas because you can individually recognize the elephants and other species.
Wow.
You can capture some small animals which you would not ever seen in the forest in real, and so on. So we use camera traps. In certain areas, we also tend to experiment with audio recordings.
Oh, wow.
And we collaborate with the Cornell University in the US, which have a really robust and probably many years or maybe decades lasting audio projects in wildlife, like individual elephant language recognition and so on. So we also provide our data to those professionals, and we want to grow these collaborations bigger for the scientific, for gathering more scientific knowledge about these animals and about the regions. And then in the first row, we use those data to work in place in the field with the local managers or local people responsible for the area. In the case of the Northern Congo, it's the WWF branch in Congo, and they can adapt their anti-poaching activities, regarding this data, because very often, unfortunately, we also witness some illegal encroachment of people, to a vast majority poachers to these areas. So we use that data. The audio recordings also have this potential of being very effective. We still lacked there are some connectivity issues. Those areas are far away from any cell phone connections, so you have to work through satellite, which is costly and so on. Yeah. But there are definitely ways of improving these things, and now we would like to focus especially on few areas in Congo, and especially a big one in the south, where we would implement all these possibilities to protect the area better. One of the method which I didn't mention yet, but it has a big potential, and they've been used in other places of the world successfully, is the drone surveillance. Not drone fighting, but really surveillance. We would need a good device, far-reaching one, which can really, circulate for hours, let's say, not minutes, but hours, and can cover big areas and detect human, presence, or maybe vehicle presence, motorbikes, boats, etc., or fires, like fire pits, in the middle of the night, which would indicate a poacher's presence. So we need to experiment it this way more thorough, and we've already started, with several universities, mainly the Czech University of Life Sciences in Prague. There is a branch of the drone, the distant monitoring of the surface. So we wish to have more collaborations of this kind with institutions or even private sector, and try what works less, and then focus on the best methods.
Wow. Well, I'm really glad you mentioned the private sector, because my next question is about what gaps are there in enabling organizations such as yourself to do their job. What's the sort of gap? Obviously, I can imagine it's funding, for example, but what's the biggest sort of, what needs to happen in order to make your work more effective?
Definitely, of course, the funding, because despite we work to a big amount of our volume as volunteers, or at least some of our members, and I'm really glad for that. But of course, we need money, and if there was more, we can do much important chunk of work. But the other thing might be lack of information towards the private sector, because they have the power, technology, or maybe they even have the will to experiment, or then to offer their solutions to a different part of worlds, and we can be a good starting point of testing and implementing such methods. They just don't know about the urgent need. So it would be great to reach more people by podcasts such as yours and others, to people who have a technology company or some advanced agriculture methods or everything which can help. We can enable them to test it and help us in Africa, while they would improve their product, for instance. So we are definitely open for such collaborations.
Wonderful. Yeah, I think collaboration is the way with all of the world's greatest challenges. We need to all band together and put an end to the devastation that's happening. Another question I wanted to ask was more about you specifically, and who I assume it's a person, but what your biggest inspiration is for the work that you're doing. You said, your family really encourage you, and they're drivers for, I guess, keeping you motivated. But is there a specific person or organization or someone that you really look up to that helps you with your work?
There are so many, so it wouldn't be fair to name just one or two. Some figures are, well known. We mentioned maybe Jane Goodall, and there are others. I'm really glad that I were able to meet some of the big people who are changing the reality. So I will name Ofir Drori, which is the founder of the Eagle Network, who started as a journalist, activist in human rights issues, and then he understood that the wildlife trade is also very, very linked to the human society, and he started to tackle it in those very difficult conditions in Central Africa, like 10 years before I even ventured to Africa for the first time. And meeting with such people in the field gives me the power and the inspiration. On the other hand, I admire the local people, no matter if they stay on the good side or on the bad side of our fight, because I have to acknowledge that they are courageous, and they have the endurance, and they have the will to be successful with very in very difficult environment, poor conditions. It's dangerous, and it's something which nothing is granted in these areas, and people have to be strong to survive. So I really respect it. In our civilizations, in the West or in the North, as you say, great. We also have great people, of course, but our civilization is already helping us, and like the normal way of living is pretty easy for an average person. In Africa, like every day is a fight, and for much of the population. So this also inspired me that there are good people there, and we just have to maybe help them a bit so that they can adapt to the world, which is difficult. And I feel that I wouldn't like to abandon these people. And as I said, these people can be the poachers for the moment, but I believe that with our activities, they can become, they can stop being poachers, for instance.
I love that. I really do love that. And as I said, I could be here all day, but I will move on to my final question, which is quite a big one. And it is partially about climate change, which is obviously, of course, a driver for the decline in many species. But in your film, I saw a sort of solution that you suggested, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I sort of understood that you suggested perhaps ecotourism could be a solution to the sort of income issues that we were talking about. So people, I guess going to see the beauty, obviously in a sustainable way, but going to see the beauty of some of these regions, and also, helping people have an income and keep their subsistence. So I wanted to unpick that a little bit and ask how you felt about the potential clash between that solution and climate change, because of course that's obviously one of the biggest drivers. So I'd love if you could unpick that. It's quite a big final question, but
thank you for that, because now maybe I should have been more clear in the movie when we are talking about the particular area in southern Congo, which is called the Tsulu Natural Reserve. And when talking about the ecotourism, we are mainly focusing, or we wish to focus in the future for local tourists.
Okay, that makes sense.
Which gives us even more potential to make it good, because what I see in Congo or in the Central African region, people are really lacking the information or the personal touch with. A regular European would probably know more about African wildlife than a regular Congolese people living in the city.
Wow.
They would know the wildlife only from the plate, but they would not see the monkeys on the movie in the TV, or they would not see it in the wild. So we wish to open the gate in some of the area and make a good practice reglementary ecotourism for especially local people.
Okay, so as an educational
awareness thing, which also gives some income opportunities for the people which are living in the in the zone adjacent to the reserve. But definitely I'm not about to plan building a Disneyland and bring tons of international tourists from Japan and so on. Of course, the tourism is a topic. The logistics around it is a topic. I'm also traveling,
of course.
But we want to do it wisely. And when people already go to Congo or to Africa for one reason or another, it doesn't have to be a tourism. Sometimes they go to a business trip,
Mm-hmm.
And why not, when they are already there, we offer them the opportunity to drive a few hours farther and see something good, maybe start to think about issues differently. So I believe that's one of the solutions. It's not the ultimate and the best solution for every region and every place, every situation. But in this particular thing, I believe it can help. It can contribute.
Definitely. And I think it would also be important to have local people being the educators, I suppose, because I think representation is important. If people see, as you say, leaders in their community or just members of their community really trying to share their views with someone like them, I think it could also be really motivating as well. So I'm glad you clarified that, because I think that's a really, really sustainable and good way to sort of kill two birds with one stone, as we would say.
You say
kill two birds with one stone.
Birds.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think you say flies in Czech Republic.
We say fly with one smash, yeah.
Right. So yes, I could be here all day, but I think I will close this podcast. But is there anything you want to add? Anything that we've missed out? Of course, I think everybody should go and watch the Elephangelist film. It's absolutely incredible, and I can't recommend it enough. And I will leave the link in the show notes so everyone can go and see. But is there anything you'd like to add?
I would not to add. I would maybe only stress what you already said and what is maybe the central topic of our talk. And this is the collaboration. In this world, when we have the opportunity, we have the connectivity, we can talk to a person on the other end of the planet. Everybody knows English more or less. In Africa, we know French. I mean, there are options. People are open to do that. So I wish that we use it more for some, global beneficial goals, and not only for pure business or pure fun, but also to create some good stuff and understand each other more. This is one of the main prerequisites for good solutions in the nature conservation as well.
We couldn't agree more. And that's really why viaGood exists, to be a community and to house people who care about all of the world's greatest challenges, be it species decline or climate change or gender inequality. So I completely back that. And I will leave links to Save Elephants' social media accounts, so you can go and follow them. I would highly recommend it. And of course, viaGood's accounts as well. But thank you so much, Arthur. This has been so informative, and I definitely have more questions off air to ask you. But yes, if we have any comments, I'll of course pass them along and you can respond.
I appreciate that, and thank you for your invitation.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Goodbye.